Shamai, if you were wondering which bass to buy, I am going to try and help you today. So first of all, I'm talking about bass ukuleles, ukulele basses, U-basses, mini basses, tiny basses, you know, the sort of smaller ones. I've had a load of questions recently asking advice about buying a bass. So I just thought, let's make a video and try and answer some of these questions. This is sort of aimed at somebody who might be buying their first bass, but hopefully it's going to be useful to lots of mini and bass ukulele bass players. And I get asked these sort of questions all the time, but I've had quite a few recently, and of course we're coming up to Christmas. So you've got to remember, a bass ukulele isn't just for Christmas, it's for life. So before I go any further, there are a few things I really need to say. First of all, your best bet is go and try different instruments. Try and go to your local music shop, all right? Ask a bass player maybe in your ukulele group if you could try their bass. But there are so many different kinds of instruments these days, it really is better to try a few if possible to see really what you prefer. So buying your first bass uke isn't quite as simple as buying your first ukulele. With your uke, once you've got your budget sussed and your size, soprano, concert, tenor, baritone, you are pretty safe to think that most of the ukulele is going to be quite similar to play. But of course, there are lots of different types of basses, which I will talk about in a minute. And you've got to think about the other things as well, things like amps and cables and so on. In the last few years, there have been a huge number of bass ukuleles, mini basses, U-basses coming onto the market. Lots of different types as well. So I'm going to try and help us muddle through the different types and give you some advice on what may or may not suit a beginner. Or somebody buying their first bass ukulele. It could be somebody who's moving from a double bass or a bass guitar down. But what I'm not going to do is tell you what to buy. Only you can decide that. So budget is important, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. What I'm going to do now is just run through quite a few of the different types. So electroacoustic versus solid body. The obvious difference with this, you can hear an electroacoustic if it's unplugged. You can barely hear a solid body bass if it's unplugged. So polyurethane strings, some people call these rubber strings, compared to metal strings, you get different kinds of both, okay? But the polyurethane strings tend to be a little bit thicker and they feel nice and soft under your fingers, but not everybody gets on with those, compared to the metal strings, which feel more like a traditional bass guitar. These ones, particular ones, are flat wounds, but of course you can get round wounds as well, which do feel more different to the polyurethane, and they sound different. Polyurethane strings sound more like an upright or a double bass sound, whereas the metal strings sound more like a bass guitar. So piezo pickups versus magnetic pickups. This is to do really with what strings you're using. Piezo pickups work with these, which are the nylon core strings with a metal outer, and also the polyurethane rubber strings. And the magnetic pickups work with steel strings with a steel core and metal outer as well. Again, more like a traditional bass guitar. Fretted versus fretless, and you can get both electroacoustics and solid body basses fretted and fretless. Now, if you're new to playing bass, fretted is definitely the way to go because it is much easier to learn to play because of intonation issues. Yeah, fretless, they often have lines on the fingerboard. And don't get me wrong, if you really want to learn fretless, go for it. But I would say maybe think about starting with a fretted bass if you're new to it. 4-string and 5-string mini basses really is whatever you want to play. Although again, if you're an absolute beginner or new to a bass, I would probably stick with the 4-string for now. Different scale lengths, in other words, from the nut down to the saddle at the bottom, just over 20 inches, 23 and a half inches. Not a huge difference there. Just be aware that there are different scale lengths. Some of you might even consider going slightly larger. This is a micro bass and it's got a 28-inch scale. So yeah, it is bigger than the mini basses, but it is definitely smaller than a normal full-scale bass guitar. And round wound strings compared to flat wound strings. And you get the round wounds and flat wounds on the magnetic mini basses as well. Hopefully that hasn't confused you too much. As I said, there are a lot of instruments out there to choose from. Okay, things to consider. So everyone's priorities are going to be different, yeah? Budget. All right, let's think about that for a minute. Bass ukulele start from under £100 and go up to well over £1,000 in some cases. So hopefully there's something that's going to suit everyone's budget. There are a lot of bass ukuleles and mini basses around about the £250 to £350, £400 mark. So that's quite, I would say, mid-range good value. But of course that is more expensive than your general first ukulele, plus your amp, plus your cable. So what's your plans for using your bass or your bass ukulele? Is it just you're going to start playing it and it's going to be practicing at home for personal use? Are you planning on playing bass in a ukulele group or a folk group or a pop or a punk or a rock group? All right, whatever takes your fancy. So consider what you were planning on using it for. What sort of sound are you looking for it? Are you looking for that upright jazz sound with a bass? Maybe flat wounds would suit you, or polyurethane strings with an electro acoustic. Or are you looking to play something like rock or punk or metal? In that case, you'd definitely be looking at magnetic pickups and metal strings. How important is portability for you? Carrying something around? Does it need to be very light, very small? Or can you manage something a little bit heavier? But remember, the whole point of mini basses and bass ukuleles and U-basses is that they are so much smaller and portable than bass guitars and certainly double basses. And you've got to look at availability as well. If you were after a left-handed 5-stringed fretless, you are going to struggle a little bit. All right, there are certain brands that do make quite a few different options. Left-handed instruments, fretless instruments, 5-string instruments, okay? But you have to choose carefully what you're really after and how available is it. And it could be it's not available in your country. Just going back to budget for a minute as well, something you really ought to consider, all right? A very, very cheap instrument isn't necessarily going to be set up very well to play, okay? So buying the cheapest for a beginner is quite often not the right thing to do. But on the other hand, buying the most expensive for a beginner, somebody who may, decide it's not for them, isn't really the best option either, okay? But as I said, there are a lot of instruments around about 200 up to about £400 mark, okay? And there's more instruments available as well, all right? So budget-wise, I personally wouldn't recommend going too cheap, and I personally wouldn't recommend going too expensive, but remember, try an instrument first if you can, or at least try different types of instruments so that you've got the feel of the rubber strings or lifting up a solid body, just to give you a better idea. So very quickly, I'm just going to run through some of the main types of these instruments, just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the pros and cons of them when you're buying them. Electroacoustics, I think these are great as a first bass for a number of reasons. First of all, very often, okay, they've got a built-in tuner on them. The polyurethane strings, they are nice and soft on the fingers. They take a bit of getting used to because they're quite thick, all right, but they're not sort of harsh like a round wound metal string. They're in a good price range, all right. You can pick up electroacoustic ones for under 100, but as I said, the cheaper you go, the worse it's going to be set up, therefore the harder it's going to be to play it. You get lots of different brands of electroacoustics. This is a U-bass. U-bass is a brand name by Carla, all right. It actually stands for Upton bass, although a lot of people think it's ukulele bass. But there we are. I think electroacoustics are a great first instrument. It is worth trying to play one, okay? Just because the polyurethane strings can be a little bit, take a bit of getting used to. And you can get lots of different types of the polyurethane strings too. The solid body polyurethane strings with piezo pickups, these are a bit hit and miss in terms of overall quality. They are a bit cheaper. This one wasn't that expensive. It's from Thomann. But yeah, some of the solid body ones can get quite expensive. Now, the reason I say they're a bit hit and miss, a lot of them are coming directly from China. They're not having quality control checks on them. And the electronics inside them isn't always the best. I've had good ones and I've had bad ones, all right? So yeah, if you're buying a solid body piezo pickup but with the polyurethane strings, just be aware that you may have issues with it, but you also may end up with a really nice mini or bass ukulele. These ones are the same scale as the electroacoustics, so about 21 inch. Great for a beginner if you're willing to take the risk, and it can be risky with them. So we're still on piezo pickups, solid body, but this time a lot more money. Okay, we're talking the timber bass, you're talking about around £500-600. The Carla California U basses, you're talking £1,000 plus. But in terms of quality control, you get a much better consistency with the electronics. Okay, some of the electroacoustic bass ukuleles have an issue where all the strings don't necessarily have the same volume on them. They're not consistent. Okay, and that's one of the issues with the quality control of them. With these ones, paying a little bit more money, you are likely to get a much better instrument. But I wouldn't go and spend this kind of money if I was just starting out as a beginner. So solid body mini basses with magnetic pickups. Carla and Flight are definitely the two to be really looking at. Okay, Carla have been making electric ukuleles, bass ukuleles, or U basses, because this is a U bass as well, for over a decade. Flight are a bit newer to the game, but have been so innovative and coming out with new ideas and things as well. And luckily for us, both companies make good quality, reasonably priced mini basses. And if you are looking to spend a little bit more, but I wouldn't recommend it as a beginner, if I'm brutally honest, okay? You could be looking at something like a tiny bass here. Now, these are a bit more expensive, and they do have more expensive models as well. You're talking £500 upwards for these, and suddenly that's twice the price of some of the Flight and Carla models. So something to bear in mind. Or you could go fully custom and have a mini peewee bass built for you by Fanner. Again, you're talking £600-700. Okay, so these two would be magnetic pickups. With the Fanner, you can basically have whatever you like. 4-string, 5-string, fretless, left-handed, and again they got a good range with the tiny basses as well. 4-string, 5-string, fretless. I don't know if they do a left hand off the top of my head. But yeah, if you want to spend the bigger bucks, have a little look, certainly at the tiny bass, and Fanner are up there as well. So I think I've covered all my bases. Get it? Bass. Anyway, right, so yeah, electroacoustic, solid body, magnetic. I'm not going to fry your brains anymore. I can't tell you what to go and buy because every single person is different, all right? So think about your budget, think about your sound, think about your portability, think about availability, think about what experience. There's a lot to think about. Okay, what I can say though is we're in a very lucky position these days because we have got a lot to choose from. My biggest bit of advice is go and try some out if at all possible. Local music shops, anybody you know who might play one, somebody in your local group, maybe you're at an event or a festival, go and come and ask me if I'll let somebody try a bass, not a problem, all right? But try and play it so you get a feel for it. Don't buy too cheap and don't buy too expensive. There is a lot of choice in that sort of range between about £200 and £400. Think about buying second hand. Okay, I have just sold one of my Flight Mini JBs for a very reasonable cost, all right? So check Facebook out. Ask in ukulele events or groups and things, all right? You just never know. And go and watch all my unboxings, my reviews, my comparisons, just to give you a much better idea of what they sound like. But remember, whenever you're listening to anything bass, wear headphones. It makes a huge difference. Wow, that's been a bit of a marathon, hasn't it? I have enjoyed going through all the basses, and I really do hope that this has helped a little bit. There is a lot out there and a lot to consider, but remember, at the end of the day, the only person who can decide what you want is you. So I do have a Patreon page if you'd like to support me here on the channel, and I'll pop a link in the description below for that. As always though, if you've got any comments or questions, please feel free, leave them below. Give us a like if you've enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos. Thank you for watching.